Association people. We were praying for you to be back safely. Also praying for your upcoming thing. Never a dull moment.
Yes, it was very beautiful, but like when the storm, I just
That's good though. That's good. I was gonna send those pants. They were Wednesday they were the same size waist. But some people wear their pants up here and some down here below their gut or whatever. But anyway, he said they're all 34s, but they were too small.
Oh, man.
That's right. That's right.
That's all what I have. So 900 pages of hardback, and it was too heavy. So I was like, I'm not reading this. So I donated it and grabbed one out of their library.
That's hilarious. How's work?
It's been going good.
Good? Feeling good?
Yeah.
Good. What, how many hours have you been working? Break the system.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you just got trying to find my corner. She works nights and draws off.
Sorry.
Today, though. No, I usually just bring them on Sunday.
All right, well, welcome to the Wednesday evening service at Faith Baptist Church. Grab your red hymnals tonight, red hymnals. Go into hymn number 416, 416. Our best is the hymn tonight. Hear ye the Master's call, give me thy best. For be it great or small, that is his test. Do then the best you can, not for reward, not for the praise of men, but for the Lord. Every work for Jesus will be blessed, but he asks from everyone his best. Our talents may be few, these may be small, but unto him is due our best, our all. On the second, wait not for men to laud, heed not their slight. Winning the smile of God brings its delight. Aiding the good and true ne'er goes unblessed. All that we think or do, be it the best. Every work for Jesus will be blessed, but he asks from everyone his best. Our talents may be few, these may be small, but unto him is due our best, our all. On the last, night soon comes on apace, day hastens by. Workman and work must face testing on high. Oh, may we in that day find rest, sweet rest, which God has promised those who do their best. Every work for Jesus will be blessed. He asks from everyone his best. Our talents may be few, these may be small. Unto him is due our best, our all. Then 451, and while you're turning there, if anybody has any favorites out of this red hymnal, just bring me the numbers and we'll figure it out. We'll sing it. But 451, thanks to God, this is Marilyn's favorite. Thanks to God for my just provide. Thanks for times now but memory. Thanks for Jesus by my side. Thanks for pleasant, balmy springtime. Thanks for dark and dreary fall. Thanks for tears by now forgotten. Thanks for peace within my soul. On the second, thanks for prayers that thou hast answered. Thanks for what thou dost deny. Thanks for storms that I have weathered. Thanks for all thou dost supply. Thanks for pain and thanks for pleasure. Thanks for comfort in despair. Thanks for grace that none can measure. Thanks for love beyond compare. On the last, thanks for roses by the wayside. Thanks for thorns their stems contain. Thanks for home and thanks for fireside. Thanks for hope, that sweet refrain. Thanks for joy and thanks for sorrow. Thanks for heavenly peace with thee. Thanks for hope in the tomorrow. Thanks through all eternity. Then 453 will be the closing hymn, 453.
All right, if you would go to the book of James. And we will be continuing on a little bit of the thought that we discussed last week. Starting there in verse number 2, James chapter 1, verse number 2. My brethren, count it all joy when you fall into diverse temptations. And we started along this thought last week that it is an accounting term there, okay? So we're doing something not necessarily emotionally, but more or less reckoning it to be true, that when we fall into all kinds of various temptations or trials or tests of all kinds of different shapes and sizes, we can count all that joy. And again, we mentioned last week, I'll just repeat it here, that this is an audacious ask of James, talking to people who had been scattered abroad, as he says there in verse number 1, and they had been ousted from their homes and their families. Probably many of them were very poor. They probably had a reputation, and so they were not living easy lives, and yet James tells them, in the midst of all of the things that they had going on in their lives, count this all joy. Realize that this is part of Christian maturity and part of the process of being a mature Christian. And we're going to talk more along that line here tonight, because verses 3 and 4, and really, depending on who you read, some say the entire chapter. Others argue maybe down to verse number 12. But I think especially verses 3, 4, and 5 specifically would be the product of somebody who allows the trial that, as we mentioned last week, is given to us by God. It's entrusted to us by God. That person will allow the trial to, as verse number 4 says, have its perfect work. It will accomplish the thing that God intended it to accomplish. And so when we count it all joy, falling into all kinds of trials, tests, difficulties, that is not, as we mentioned last week, again, that's not having fake platitudes or pretending like everything is peachy keen when there's some struggles going. It's not wrong to recognize, hey, this thing is hard, but it is a mental decision to trust the Lord and say, God intended this for his glory and for my good. And it's an affirmation of faith that all things work together for good to them that love God, to them that are the called according to his purpose. Again, that doesn't mean they're joyous in the present necessarily. Probably they're not joyous in the present, all these different temptations and trials. But it's an understanding that at the core, God is doing something for my good and for his glory with this trial. Okay, so verse number 3, and we'll look at verses 3 and 4 here tonight. It says, knowing this, that the trying of your faith worketh patience. But let patience have her perfect work, that ye may be perfect and entire, wanting nothing. And it's important for us to understand, again, the end goal here would be down at the end of verse number 4. That ye would be perfect and entire, wanting nothing. And we'll talk about this a little bit later on, but there are ingredients that go into somebody being perfect and entire and wanting nothing. That's the product, but the trial, as James tells them and is explaining to them, is part of that process for them to get to that point. Also, look down at verse number 12. We won't really cover this in this context, but it's important here. Blessed is the man that endureth temptation, for when he is tried, he shall receive the crown of life, which the Lord hath promised to them that love him. And so there's really two reasons that James argues with them, arguing for the inclusion of trials. Number one is it's going to make you a perfectly mature Christian. And it's necessary for you to be a mature Christian, to be perfect and entire, to not lack anything. You have to go through trials. But also number two is there's going to be a crown of life for those who endure trials. In other words, God is going to take note, and I know we mentioned this last week, that nothing comes into your life without being placed on the desk of God and stamped with his approval, and that's true. But also at the same time, God is going to take notice, and he is going to give a crown of life to those who endure temptation. Trials are part of life, but they're not necessarily always something as we might think of it as a bad thing. Maybe, again, not joyous, but at the same time, it's part of the maturation process for a Christian. All right, so verse number 3, he says, knowing this. And this is an important phrase. James, as he's talking to them about enduring their trials, says it starts with an understanding, something that you know. You have to know or reckon or count, as he says in verse 2, that this is for your good. All these temptations, all these trials, they're working out for your good. And it's something we must know. We have to remind ourselves of. We have to tell our heart and tell our emotions at different times, hey, remember what we know. This may not be joyous in the present, but we know that this is part of the journey for us to grow and to evidence our faith, as the theme of the book is. If we didn't know that God uses trials, and as this is going to argue in the next couple of verses, that God needs trials, the way he set it up, in order for us to mature and grow. If we didn't know that, we'd be tempted to run from every possible trial that we could, instead of enduring it, instead of waiting under the pressure of the trial and saying, God, what are you trying to teach me through this? We'd be tempted to just complain about it and to tell God, you don't know what you're doing about this. But James is saying you have to understand. You keep this at the forefront. You know that this is part of the journey of the Christian. And so, again, he's placing the primacy, if you will, on what is true, not necessarily what we feel. So the first necessity then is to act scripturally, not emotionally. Now, I'll say these two things coincide often. They're not always at odds with each other. You probably heard some people teach and preach through the years that every emotion is wrong. Well, that's simply not true. And I think at times maybe we can see some overreactions in different places towards emotionalism, and then at times there's overreactions against emotionalism. But emotions are God-given. They're not wrong. It's not wrong to feel things. Jesus himself wept at the pain of Mary and Martha. So Jesus had emotions. Emotions are not bad, and it's ridiculous to argue that every emotion is wrong. But emotions have their place, and their place is to be subservient, as everything else is, to the Spirit of God. It's supposed to rank under, what does God tell me about this? So when I'm in a trial, again, I might not enjoy it emotionally. There's nothing wrong with that. That's not the command to slap a fake plastic smile on your face every time you're going through something hard. That's not the command. No, this is much deeper than an emotional decision. It's a reckoning in your spirit, and God's using this for good. I need to count it joy in my spirit. And I'm to keep my emotions in check to reflect what's on the inside by reckoning what I know to be a fact, that this trial is for God's glory and for my benefit. So it starts with, I have to have a knowledge that God is doing something here. And again, as we're going to belabor over the point of the book, this is a book of faith. This is a book where James is telling them this is living out your faith. And there's almost nothing that hits to the center of faith as quickly as going through a trial. A trial will show you very quickly, do I really trust God? It's easy when everything is going well to just say, well, of course we trust God. And it's much harder when things are not going right, when all these things seem to be crumbling or falling apart all around us, when there's diverse temptations of all shapes and sizes, and sometimes even snowballing on top of each other. That's where the test comes in. And I have to know and reckon in my heart that all of these things, God's doing something with them. He's doing something good. And it's a faith position and decision to say that I trust God in the midst of this. One author wrote it this way, a commentator. He said, trials are given to us by our Father, and here's his quote, "The Father is too caring to be unkind and too wise to make any mistakes." And I like that, and that's true. And so when we go through a trial, that's what we need to know. That God is the one who put this in my life, and he's going to do something good with it. He's too kind, he's too caring to be unkind. He's too wise to make any mistakes. By the way, this is something that you need to know, and something that all of us will probably, as I mentioned, have to remind ourselves over and over and over. Because you know how trials are, and sometimes we as people just do the roller coaster, and we need to maybe remind ourselves on the bad days, God's still in control, and God's still in charge, and he's still doing something for my good and for his glory. So, what do we know? As he says there in verse 3, knowing this, well, what are we supposed to know? That the trying of our faith works patience. What are we assured of? We are assured that our faith, when it is tried, it works out patience. I've been thinking about this a little bit. I started thinking about this week, and I think there's going to be a bunch of these throughout the book of James. How many of you liked math? Okay, I got a handful in here. You liked math. I liked math as long as it was extremely predictable. I like predictable outcomes. In other words, I liked arithmetic. I like things that you plug in an equation and this equation works in every situation all the time. I didn't care for the abstract very much. When you're measuring, angles and different things, and there's writing proofs, theoretical proofs and different things, I hated that stuff. I like 1 + 1, it always equals 2 no matter what, and I liked that. I was thinking about James. James he has a little bit of an equationist. I think I made up that word. At least my spell check didn't know if that's a word or not. It underlined it in red. But he has kind of an equationist mind. He writes equations, biblical equations for things. And there's many in the book of James. You know, you think quickly, if you think about the book of James, faith without works is dead. You could write that as a mathematical equation. Faith minus works equals dead. Okay, so I wrote this out here in verse number 3, as a mathematical equation. And the mathematical equation here is that trying plus faith equals patience. That's the mathematical equation. And so James adds things together and explains how this plus this equals this. Trying plus or testing plus faith equals patience. If you look at verse number 4, you actually get another equation. And that equation, as he says there, is let patience have her perfect work, that ye may be perfect and entire, wanting nothing. Maybe not quite as obvious of one there. But in general, it'd be patience plus maturity, or something being carried to its completed end there, equals completeness in the believer. So if any believer is going to be perfect or complete, as he says in verse number 4, he must first be tried, for he will not have the essential ingredient of patience without it. And this is why James says we can count it all joy, because without the trying, there will be no completion. A Christian who criticizes God about a trial is a Christian who is short-sighted. And I want to say that nicely, because trials are hard, okay? I don't want to, again, it's very easy to stand up here and just say everything about trials, you know, when you're not going through them. I'm not saying that you can't struggle through a trial, or again, that you should have a fake smile on your face. Trials are hard, okay? We all recognize that. There's no problem to admit that. But a trial, as we've mentioned, should be rooted in deep faith that God knows what he's doing and that it's all going to work together for my good in the end. But I'll repeat that a Christian who criticizes God about a trial is short-sighted. So I was thinking about this. I have a sister-in-law who doesn't like eggs. She doesn't like eggs. You can scramble and fry them, whatever. She doesn't like them. Her name's Emma, and she just does not like eggs. Now, I want you to imagine with me that every time Emma goes out shopping with her mom, I want you to imagine that her mom buys eggs every time they go grocery shopping. And I want you to further imagine that in the store, there in their little town in Mayville at the Piggly Wiggly, let him from Wisconsin understand, okay? But you're at the Piggly Wiggly there buying a dozen eggs, and I want you to imagine Emma throwing a fit and yelling at her mom and saying, "Mom, don't you know I don't like eggs?" Okay? So this whole thing goes on. Mom doesn't say a word, although my mother-in-law would say a word, but let's just say she doesn't. She buys the eggs anyway. She doesn't say a word to Emma, just gets the eggs. They don't buy eggs either, they have chickens. But anyway, it's the illustration. Okay, so the two get home, and Mom starts baking a cake. And she, of course, uses the eggs. Now, Emma doesn't like eggs, but she does like cake. And she happily eats the cake that Mom made, not even realizing, again, she would realize, but you understand that the very thing she complained about was a necessary component for the thing she enjoyed. This is trials. Trials are the eggs. You might not like them. You don't enjoy it as you're working through it. But when the product comes out, it's for your benefit. It's good. How many of you like Reuben sandwiches? Okay, amen. Reuben sandwiches are delicious. You know, I don't like much of a Reuben by itself. Almost nothing on that sandwich I'd eat by itself. But man, you throw that thing all together and it's like, man, we are in heaven. I love that sandwich, a delicious sandwich, you know. But there are many things like that if you look at the ingredients list, you will find, I don't like this. This doesn't, I'm not a fan of onion, okay? I am, but my wife doesn't like onions, and there's onions in everything. And yet, if you mix it all together, it turns out to be something that's good. And that's what a trial is. It's something that an ingredient, so to speak, that God is whisking together, making it perfect so that we come out as we ought to in the end. That's how trials work. They may not be something we like in their raw form, but a necessary ingredient to Christian completion. And while we might not like all the ingredients, we do like the cake. It would be foolish of us to pretend that the only thing my mother-in-law could do with those eggs is to scramble them and serve them for breakfast. That's foolish. We know there's all kinds of uses for that. And it'd also be foolish of us to think that the only reason God brings a trial is to cause sorrow in our lives. Of course, that's not what's going on. His plans are way bigger than that. Maybe he's in the process of making your favorite cake. So you've got to trust him, and I've got to trust him when things are hard. And that's what I know. I know that trial plus faith works out equals patience. And I'm not going to get patience. And if I don't have patience, again, according to verse number 4, I'm not going to have perfection or completeness. There's going to be something I lack. I'm not going to have that then if I don't have patience. And I'm not going to get patience without the trial. So it's an ingredient. So we've got to learn to see the trial as a good thing. Flip over a few pages, if you don't mind, to 1 Peter chapter 1. Peter makes a very bold statement as well concerning trials. And he says in verse number 7, he says that the trial of your faith, by the way, the whole book of 1 Peter is about enduring trials. And if somebody would have known about trials, Peter certainly did not live an easy life, especially after the ascension of Christ. But verse 7, he says, the trial of your faith being much more precious than of gold that perisheth, though it be tried with fire, might be found unto praise and honor and glory at the appearing of Jesus Christ. What is he saying? He's saying that these trials, they're valuable because they make you look like Jesus. They're part of the process of God completing you as a believer. So again, not to beat a dead horse, repeat myself too much, but again, I'm not saying that we don't struggle as we go through trials, but it's something we need to know and then get our emotions in line with as subservient to the Spirit of God, that these trials are for my benefit. God's using them to complete me. Okay, let's look at the three ingredients here in the equation number 1. And the three components or ingredients, depending on which analogy you'd like to go with, we have the trial, we have faith, and then we have patience. And we won't belabor these too much, but I'd like to just talk about them for a moment. Okay, so trying plus faith equals patience. So first of all, we have trying, and this is testing or proving, especially concerning, as you know, something going through the fire, being put to the test. This is the final exam. This is the purifying of the gold. It's something that's under a lot of pressure, the trial. It's being proven. I remember every time I was complaining about something hurting when I was a young person. We had a lady in my church who kind of was like a second mother to me. And she said this, every time somebody complained to her about something hurting, she would just say, no pain, no gain. She said it all the time. And it got really annoying because, she never took anything seriously. But but that's true. You know that. If you exercise or you're working out or whatever, it's supposed to hurt. If there's no pain, you're not gaining anything. And that's true oftentimes for our Christian lives as well. Maturity comes from the proving. It comes through the testing. And I think we are very quick as believers to, when we're in the midst of a trial, just wish it was over. That's our first response. I wish this was over. And again, from a human standpoint, I understand that. But we have to know God's doing something with this. I'm sure you've had preachers come in. I'm sure Pastor Only's preached on this many times. But, a phrase you've heard over and over in your life, I'm sure, don't waste a trial. Don't waste it. Why? Because God's trying to teach you something through it. And by the way, if you don't learn it, what seems to happen is you get something in the same vein or a similar trial that just keeps coming back. So it may as well learn the lesson, right? I remember before working here at the church, before coming here, working at the restaurant. And I liked being busy. I loved being busy at the restaurant, but most of my coworkers hated being busy. They complained about it relentlessly. And I remember we'd be getting slammed. We'd have so many tickets, and we felt so busy. There was a stretch when COVID first hit. It was the best thing that ever happened to the restaurant, go figure. But we had 12 weeks in a row, consecutive weeks, where we smashed and rewrote our record book for the busiest week we ever had. 12 weeks in a row. It was nuts. It was crazy. That I remember one of the things, if we were ever slow at the restaurant, one of my favorite things to do was to go into the office. You know, if you're feeling down, we're not selling things, it's just a slow day or whatever, pull out the book out of the office that has the log of what the sales were on this day last year. And for the last like 10 years that I worked there, which is a long time, we never had a month where we were not still growing. I mean, we were growing and growing and growing and growing. We never hit a plateau. And so it was funny. You would go back in that book and you would say, wait a minute, we only did this number last year? And you would feel like, how is it that we only did this number? But if you think about it, going back to last year, you remember that day and you're like, man, that day felt so busy to us. We felt like we were doing so much. And then it was really fun when you look back 5 or 6 or 7 years and you realize we're literally doing double what we did 5 years ago. And it was crazy. And 5 years ago, you felt like we are so busy right now. What am I saying? I'm saying that once you're busy all the time, you get good at it. You get used to it. You learn how to actually get better at what you're doing. And that's what trials do. We looked at some of the numbers and we looked back and we would laugh because we remember how stressful those days were, how busy we felt like we were. Those days would have been unimaginable and unmanageable. And yet now I'm sitting there where we had 4 people in the kitchen and we felt like we couldn't keep up 3 years ago. Now we have 2 people in the kitchen and we're doing it sleeping. You know, you get better at it. The challenge actually improved us. And yet, I had many coworkers over those years who spent the entire time that we were busy complaining. I know that's very hard to imagine in food service that the employees would be complaining. You're all shocked, I know it. But the ones who spent the entire time complaining, guess what? They never got that much better. They were just complaining the whole time. I had a coworker, we laughed at him. He was a funny guy, and I liked him. We had a lot of fun together, but he would come in, and he was mad every day, like from the get-go. It's like he had decided, I'm going to be crabby all night, no matter what. And it would take, usually, a shift would start at 4 o'clock, and you would actually almost like keep a score, like what time can I pull him out of his mood, you know, maybe by 7:30, whatever. And it was a little bit of a game because you have to do those things in food service anyway. But, you know, he came in every day and he was just mad all the time. Well, he never got much better, never. Because instead of learning from the trial and learning from the challenge, he decided, I'm going to just complain about it. So ingredient number 1 is trying, and we ought to embrace the trying. It might not be pleasant, but it is necessary. Okay, ingredient number 2 is faith. We have trying plus faith. Now, I want you to think about this because trials come to every person. They're indiscriminate in that way. And whether you're saved or whether you're lost, you deal with trials. Consider that some people endure their trials with nothing to show for it because they're lacking faith. They don't know God. And the Christian who doesn't exercise faith in the midst of the trial is really not much better. The trial is not going to accomplish what it's supposed to do. It has to include faith. And there are many people who go through all the hard things of life and it never actually works out to mature them and grow them and to bring them into completeness because they just don't have faith. We must recognize that the trial is going to be concerning our faith. That's what the trial is going to challenge. It's going to push, do you really believe the things that you claim you believe? And some of the questions you might ask in the midst of a trial, well, why would God allow this? And again, that's not a wrong question to ask, But there's an answer to that that is faith-filled, and there's an answer to that that is despairing and lacks faith. And we need to make sure that we answer in a faith-filled way. You might ask in the midst of a hard time or in a trial, does God really care about me? Is God still listening to me? Is God still present in my life? And these are all things that are natural when we go through something difficult. In a book where James is challenging us to live out our faith, he recognizes that such a request begins with a test of our faith. If we will live it, it is only because we cling to it despite the struggles we face. Not, as you know, that the Christian life is a bed of roses. Maintaining faith in God, even through the difficulties, is an indispensable part of true Christian growth. And there ought to be the expectation of grace, guidance, growth, and ultimately God through the midst of every trial. You ought to be drawn closer to God. Count it joy. Why? Because we know that the trying plus the faith equals patience. It's the only possible pathway to Christian maturity. All right, and then the result there, the equals, we have patience. And we'll talk about this word more as we go because it appears again in the next equation. But let me just give you a quick definition. You probably, again, heard this in your life. That word patience comes from a combination of two Greek words that are thrown together. Greek likes to do that a lot. There's a lot of prefixes and suffixes and other things in the language. And this is one that is the same way. The word is hupomeno, and hupo means under in Greek, and meno means to remain or to abide. The most famous instance of this would have been in John 15, when Jesus says, abide in the vine, or abide in me and I in you. It's the same in John 14, I will dwell with them, make my abode with them. Very, very important word in Scripture. And again, staying with something. So patience, the result that we have of patience is something that we have remained under, or in other words, we're a product of the pressure cooker. The pressure had its work on us. Embracing the trial gives us the ability to withstand pressure. And it is, again, obviously only through pressure that we are purified, only through the fire that we become like gold. But again, this idea of patience is one, you could say, of endurance as well. This is not trying to get out from the pressure at the first possible exit. This is someone remaining where the fire is hot, remaining where the pressure is great, and saying, God, you're trying to teach me something through this. I need patience in order to be a spiritually mature person who lacks nothing. And if I'm going to get to completeness, I'm not going to be able to run from every trial and say, I don't want to deal with that. You're going to be the person who says, no, I'm going to remain under the pressure. I'm going to stay in it. I may not like it, but I know that's necessary for God making me into the person, the completed Christian that He wants me to be. So I count it all joy. Why? Because it's a necessary ingredient to the process of being the Christian that God has designed for you and I to be. All right, questions, comments? Okay. All right, do we have prayer requests tonight? Anything that we are adding to the list? Continue to pray for Gary Smith, if you would. I know many of you have been and are. Just continue to pray for him. His blood sugar's kind of been going up and down a little bit. They're not 100% sure why, from my understanding, talking with them, but if you just continue to pray for him. I know he goes and sees a heart doctor on Friday. I don't know if they'll be able to do any of the procedure that they're wanting to with his heart. He's on some medication still, so if you just continue to pray for him. All right. Anybody else? Anything that we are adding here? Pastor, did you talk to Bob McDaniels at all this week?